Alright, this video is going to be about simplifying rational expressions. And a rational expression, all that is just something that can be written as a fraction. Okay, that's really all it means. So rational, the word ratio is in there. So moving on from that, let's look at our first problem. Here we have 30xy divided by 16y. And I wrote y in a different color just to kind of make it stand out a little bit. So this one, I think the first thing that I'm going to do is just separate this into separate fractions, just kind of expand it out to hopefully make it a little bit easier to see what's going on here. So I'll write this 30 over 16. I just took the constants, just the regular numbers, and I write that as one fraction. Now let's see, there's an x on the top, no x on the bottom, so I'll leave that as x over 1. And then we have y over y. Now, with y over y, any number divided by itself is just going to be a 1, right? No matter what we put in for y. So I'm going to cross that out and just know that that is 1. All right, now 30 over 16, we can simplify that a little bit. 30 divided by 2 would give us 15. 16 divided by 2 is 8. X over 1, there's not really anything to do there. So I'm just going to write this as 15 over 8 x. All right, and you probably wouldn't want to do that every time, right? This is just kind of an example, an illustration that you could think of these problems this way if it helps. But as you get more practice, you'll probably just work on it over here in this form. Taking a look at our second problem here, I'm just going to work this one the same way. So let's just start by trying to break it apart into pieces. So I don't have a constant or just a plain number on the top. So I'll just leave that as a 1 or understood 1 there. And we do have a 2 on the bottom, so let's write that down. We have an x kind of by itself on the top and an x on the bottom. And also on the top we have a quantity in parentheses x minus 6. So the thing to know about that is you have to treat that quantity as a number being multiplied. Right, so you cannot break apart the x and the minus 6 into separate fractions. It all has to go along for the ride. Okay, so if we leave that in parentheses, we'll kind of respect that. All right, so is there anything to simplify here? Well, x over x is just going to give us a 1, so let's just cross that out. And we'll rewrite the 1/2. Not really anything to do there. And x minus 6 divided by 1, well, anything divided by 1 is just going to give you that same something out. So let's just write x minus 6. All right, there's a little bit more to do here. We can distribute this 1/2 to the parentheses, right, to the quantity. So let's do that. We'll take the 1/2 and we'll multiply it by everything in there individually. So 1/2 times x is going to give us a 1/2 x. 1/2 times negative 6 is going to give us negative 6 over 2. All right, we can go a little bit further. 1/2 x minus 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now I could have also written this x over 2 minus 3. Okay, both are correct there. Okay, in this third problem, I'm not going to go ahead and expand everything out. I'm just going to work on it as it is, kind of in its fraction form there. So let's see, is there anything that we can simplify? Well, we have an x on the top that's being multiplied by itself and an x on the bottom. So I'm just going to cross those out and say that's x over x. It's basically just 1, so we don't need to write that again. All right. Now we have a 6 and a 3. We can simplify that a little bit. 6 divided by 3 would give us a 2. And 3 divided by 3 would give us a 1. So that becomes 2 over 1, or just 2. All right, so what do we have left? Well, on the top we have a 2y times 2x minus 1 all over, what's left on the bottom? Well, 1. And since it's 1, there's really no need to write this as a fraction anymore. We can just say 2y times 2x minus 1. Okay, and now depending on what you're doing with this, you may or may not want to do this next step, because some people would say this is the simplest form of this, but just so we kind of review how to do this, we're going to distribute the 2y onto the parentheses. And how do we do that? Well, we just multiply the 2y times everything in the parentheses individually. All right, so 2y times 2x. First thing you do is just multiply those constants. So 2 times 2 is going to give you 4. And then y times x, well, we don't know what y is, and we don't know what x is. So all we can really do is just rewrite it yx. Okay, and then 2y times minus 1, or negative 1. Multiplying by negative 1, all that's going to do is just change the sign, so that just becomes a negative 2y. Okay, and this one, it looks like there's a lot going on here, but there's really not. It turns out that this one's pretty simple to work out, and it's very similar to the other one. So what we're going to do here, like I said before, if there's something in parentheses where there's stuff going on, so like in this one, 2x plus 7, you just have to learn to treat those things in parentheses as a number, right? Just a number by itself. So we don't know what x is, but if we just pretended that x was 3, then that would be 2 times x, or 2 times 3 is 6, plus 7 would give us 13. Right, and on the bottom we would have the same thing, in parentheses 13. So before, if we had a number divided by itself, we just crossed it out. So same thing. If we have 2x plus 7 divided by 2x plus 7 in parentheses, we're just going to cross it out and say that's 1, I don't need to rewrite it. All right, so what are we left with? 5x plus 16 over 6. All right, and we can break this apart if we wanted to. Since the numerator, there's addition going on, we can break it into 2 separate fractions. So 5x divided by 6 plus 16 over 6. Now 16 over 6 we can simplify a little bit if we want. So 3 doesn't go into 16 evenly. 2, looks like that's the best we're going to do. 16 divided by 2 is 8. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So that becomes 8/3. So let's rewrite this as 5/6 x plus 8/3.